have you all joining virtually. Like, it's very, very special, especially as this is my first solo show ever. And I'm just feeling very blessed right now to be here and to be in this space and be here with all of you, and all of you online, all of the support that has made it possible for me to make this work. I really want to start with the fact that in the first 2 months of my residency here, there is an intense rise in the attacks on Asian Americans in this country. And after the mass shooting in Atlanta, I was completely broken. I thought I knew what I wanted coming into this residency. I thought I knew the work that I was making and that I wanted to make. But it all shifted, right? Like when you go through grief, things change. And my materials were really here for me in that moment. Like clay was here for me, that I could build it up and it would break down with me. And was struggling a lot with it, but it allowed me to process grief in a really unique and giving way. Like I think that materials are very generous, even in their breaking. So I want to thank also my materials for that. And that's really where this body of work is stemmed from, is this extreme awareness of my position as someone who's Malaysian Chinese in this country, who's the child of an immigrant, who's mixed race. And I've always sort of lived in between worlds, like where I'm not one category or another. And we really like in the world, but especially the United States, to categorize things and to really understand them based on a label. And, like I've never fit that label, and most of us don't, right? But I've been achingly aware of it as someone who's mixed, that has to move through the world getting asked, what are you? Instead of like as an introduction, right? Like as a hello, like what are you? And so I've sort of been like, well, I'm an alien. I don't know. I come from a different world. I want to exist in a different world that can truly support me, and that I feel like I can just exist fully as myself, surrounded by people I love, surrounded by an environment that I love. And so I've always sort of divin into books and movies and stuff like that had to do with fantasy environments and sci-fi and sort of these other worlds, because I'm like, this one doesn't support me. I feel broken. I feel like I'm never quite one thing or another here, and that I'm very transient. How do I know a space? How do I know an environment in a world to exist in? And that's sort of drawn me to creating my own, and thinking about where I come from as someone who's Malaysian Chinese, and what sort of like environments I grew up with through textiles and through different types of imagery, through food, through the care and hands of my ancestors and the people who have led me to be here today. And so that is really where this work is coming from, is creating natural environments and worlds that I feel like I can be a part of, and that we can celebrate just joyful color and a loving space to grow and become yourself. So this main wall, is made up of several different materials. So the wall pieces here are ceramic. So there's all parts of some of the larger pieces I was doing at the beginning of my residency that fractured and broke on the way to the kiln. And that's one of the things about clay, is that things break. You can know all you want to about clay, but it really wants to break. And especially I was experimenting with really lacy forms that reference batik patterning. So they're very fragile, and so they broke, right? And I went ahead and fired them anyways, being like, oh, this is an opportunity, right? This is an opportunity to create something new. And so they're 3D doodled. So there's a 3D pen that I use that extrudes plastic and you can draw into the air with it. And so that's what all of the bright colors underneath here are these built environments using this technology. And then the pieces themselves were then taken through a vat of kozo, which is a paper fiber that's primarily used in Eastern paper making. And it's the inner bark of the mulberry tree that's then cooked down with soda ash and hand beaten. And for me, I pigmented it, and then this ceramic piece moved through the water that had this fiber dispersed in it and collected it and sort of became aggregates. So that's what each of these individual pieces are made out of, is the ceramic, the 3D doodle, and then the paper fiber, which is kozo. And behind them on this wall, these are what is called an overbeaten abaca. So the abaca fiber is in the banana family, and I use overbeaten fibers because they go into like a massive Hollander beater, which is this giant machine, and it like grinds them really, really fine. And with abaca, it has really high shrinkage when it's like that, and it also has high translucency, so it's really strong and holds color beautifully. And so I combine it with methyl cellulose, which is a plant glue, and water, and did these giant pours where I was manipulating boards that were covered in plastic and pouring onto that to create these sort of, organic growth, watery forms that really play with color as its own material. So those are the two fibers on here in this wall. And it's really my grounding force in this, and talking about fracturing and making something whole out of things that have broken. So the other forms that you'll see in the show, this particular piece and a lot of the larger ceramic pieces in the show is because I became really obsessed with this cactus that's in Sonoma on one of my walks. And it was just sort of growing like crazy, and it looked like it was growing off of a tree trunk. But I found out that was actually part of the natural process of aging of a cacti is called corking, where it literally transforms its base to become more bark-like and more structural for the inevitability of new growth, of its thinking really of the future and how to support that crazy growth any way that it goes. And for me, that's a huge metaphor in this work, is like, how do we transform our world now? How are we anticipating the change that we need to see worlds that I could exist in here, not just in my imagination, in the forms that I'm creating, but like what sort of social change needs to happen, and what are the seeds of that that we're working on now. So that's one of the main forms and guiding metaphors of this show. And then these sort of egg-shaped pieces, they're very lacy, and for me that like references the kabaya I'm wearing. It references batiks and the sarongs I grew up with, and really thinking about things that are in motion, that feel like they're growing, that they're alive, but are derived from imagery, natural imagery from my heritage. And so these are ceramic that was glazed, and then it was dragged through that kozo fiber again. And that's the only two materials in these particular pieces. And then we're gonna move here to pieces that literally use batik as well. So you can see there's fiber interwoven with the ceramic pieces, and then beads hanging off of that. And for me, like, it's really important as someone who works with materials that are very labor intensive to think of the labor of the people that have come before me, and of the women in my family especially, and like what sort of like mainly what I grew up with was people making food, right? And making food for me, which is also something you do with care with your hands. And so that's really what I'm thinking about with these, and really all of my work, right, is like, how do I honor the past in thinking about the future, and how do we think about and transform our present to allow for that growth? So these are ceramic, and then kozo, and then the batik forms, which I took to the sewing machine, and then beads dripping off of that. And this particular one has 3D doodling where there were cracks and I mended them and really built off of like taking that once again as an opportunity for newness and for exciting things to happen. Yeah, and that's really like mainly what I wanted to say, but I'd love to hear questions because I know like there's a lot going on process-wise that people might have questions about. Yeah, and I'm here. I'm here at your disposal. People that if they unmute themselves, we can't hear them. Our sound is off. So okay. Yeah, so if you want to ask a question, our sound is off, so you can't unmute yourself. Please use the chat box. And then someone here will read those questions to me and I will repeat them. So. Did you do all of the beading? I did all of the beading. Actually, it was one of my aunties that are here in the Bay Area that put me onto a bead spinner, which is like a bowl that spins and you have a curved needle and it'll load the beads for you. So at least for all of these drippy things, that helps speed up the process enormously. But all of the sort of like clustery, like growy forms were all, you know, hand loaded and beaded into the fabric. What is your glazing process? What's my glazing process? Really, honestly, I haven't worked with glaze that much. I've always avoided it for many different reasons, mainly because it's such a complex world. And there's a lot of knowledge to know about glazing and learn about it. And so I came into this residency being like, I need to confront this, right? That this was something that I didn't really need to use for my work because I was pouring paper onto ceramic vessels. And therefore, I didn't feel the need for glaze. But thinking about this with the paper fiber, I really wanted to have some sort of resist and some complexity to them. And so having the glazing and leaving pieces unglazed where the clay is still porous, then the kozo wanted to sort of suck up into that because it had a water content and the clay was porous and it wanted to just suck all the water out of it. So it wanted to cling to those areas. So really I primarily used, like, I think there are 4 glazes at work here that were all recipes from Glazing online that I trialed a bunch to see what I wanted. And I'm really in love with matte glazes that go glossy when they're really thick. So you can sort of build layers and have different finishes, which really helps integrate my mixed materials. Yeah. What kind of clay do you use? What kind of clay do I use? There are a couple different clay bodies in here. This is one that we have at the community center, which is Peat 14. So it goes up to cone 10, but I was only firing to cone 6 for the glazes, which for anyone who isn't a ceramicist is around 2100 degrees. And so, so I really wanted the clay body to still be porous. So I used a high to take in that fiber. So then I used that high clay body with a lower temp glaze. Yeah, and then there's the larger sculptural pieces are a Lisa clay. So it's a red clay body that has a lot of grog to it, which is a grit, you know, and so you can build really large with it easily. Yeah. Somebody has a question about the large pores. They're particularly striking. And their question is, how did you discover this process and what do you use to color Okay, yeah. No, so these large pores are something that I started developing when I was in my BFA program at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts University in Boston with Michelle Samore, who's the papermaking instructor. And I was doing, so overbeaten abaca is a normal thing to pigment with. I used Aardvark Colors pigments and to use for pulp painting. So you'd like pull a fresh sheet of paper and then you could paint with this fiber like it was a paint that then absorbs into the sheet of paper, so it becomes one sort of body. But I was doing it with a lot of methyl cellulose and water because I wanted this translucency on those sheets of paper. And then someone told me, they were like, well, what if they weren't confined to a sheet of paper? Like, what if they weren't held in this rectangle? And so with the help of Michelle Samore, I started doing this large pouring. I just started experimenting what sort of materials I could pour onto, which ends up being plastic stretched over some sort of frame that's light enough for me to manipulate with my whole body. So I pour a large amount onto one end of some like sheet with plastic on it, and then I tilt the board in every direction to manipulate the fibers as they move down and adding more as I go. And so it's like a really performative process and very much engaging my whole body to create these large environments, which I appreciate.
Are the pores for sale?
Are the pores for sale? The pores are for sale if you want to talk to me about it. They're really difficult to install, so it has to be more of a conversation.
Can you talk about fragility in your work? It seems like every material you choose and the way you work with it, it's all fragile across the board.
Yeah. So Kayla was asking about if I can talk about fragility in my work and how many of my materials are really fragile. For me, fragility is really important in thinking about things that are in process, right? That aren't completely set. There's a possible still breaking or motion or changing of the forms, even after I've made them, right? And there are things that are unexpected and that come from the materials themselves, but also, you know, like I'm talking about futures, I'm talking about world building. And for me, those things aren't set. There isn't one way that they can be or one way that we can imagine a future, but they're always in motion and changing based on new information and new understandings of the things that are broken in our world, that we're like, okay, well now how do we reimagine this, you know, in a new context? And so fragility in my work is really an opening for me to play with that and really respond to my materials.
This next question talks about how many different types of art forms you're using to make these beautiful sculptures. Can you talk about what motivated you to use all those different materials?
Yeah, so if I am remembering correctly from what Lexi just read to me, I was being asked about like talking about how many different types of mediums I'm using and forms and what motivates me to be multidisciplinary. And I think that really is about being mixed. You know, I'm drawn to, you know, making things more complicated, you know, and having materials that feel like they're set against each other, hard and soft, that they're dual. They've got very, you know, there's a sense of a dichotomy. And I'm like, I want to prove that that's false, right? I want to say these things are not meant to be separate. They don't have to be separate. They can exist together and they're meant to. And things are more interesting when you have multiple layers and multiple things happening. So it's really like primarily ceramic and paper making and fiber work that I do, but I have worked with metal and I have worked with like a lot of different types of mediums, and who knows how they will have a role in my work moving forward.
This next question is about the breakage of your work.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel when your delicate work?
So I was being asked about the breakage of my work and how I feel when my work breaks. And, it's always devastating. I think I'm less devastated than other people if they're helping me. Especially considering some of the people in this room right now who helped me load some of this work that then shattered and broke. And I know that's like a really difficult experience when you're helping caretake them to that, to a more solid state. But like, I think that's what really this time has been about, is embracing that. Now I'm like, yeah, it broke. What can I do with that? I'm sometimes a little disappointed when things don't crack, when they don't break, because I'm like, oh, how interesting, like, what can I do with that? Where is the opportunity here? Yeah, so it's like, a back and forth thing. I can still vividly remember how I feel the first time a ceramic piece exploded in the kiln of mine. And I got a text from my teacher at the time, Kathy Liu, and she was like, Anela, don't freak out. Like, there's this piece, your piece that you worked on shattered in the kiln because someone else's piece blew up. And I was just like a wreck for that whole weekend. Like she's like, it's okay. You've got big pieces. Like you can do so much with that. And I was like, really? Like I just spent all this time perfecting this form and now like it's broken. But I think that is the lifelong lesson of ceramics, is it's always, sometimes it's not even your thing that breaks, right? It's someone else's in the kiln. It's the material doing something different, like, and you have to learn to be detached. Yeah.
Who are your greatest inspirations?
Who are my greatest inspirations? Oh man. Honestly, I can't even think of them right now because there are so many. I like the people that like I tend to be slightly obsessed with are people who are like women working really big, because it's always felt like this a monumental thing to make larger work, and to be someone who's small and who doesn't normally like take up a lot of space. And I was sort of taught, and that's sort of something you feel often as someone who's Asian in this country or a woman, like there's so many reasons to feel marginalized and to feel like you shouldn't be able to take up space in a room. And making big has always been like, I'm taking up space, right? Like I'm here, even if I hadn't learned that lesson in my life to take up space where I wanted to, like working big was always the place that I found that. And so like I always think of Ruth Asawa, and her sort of like knit metal forms, and like how awesome it was that she was this small woman making these ginormous works on these massive scales. So yeah, there are obviously a lot of other people I can't think of right now. Yeah.
This next question kind of relates to that, like your open forms. Your forms are very porous, and regardless of their scale, they feel that there's a recognition of breath in them.
Oh man, gonna have a hard time rephrasing this question because it's so beautiful. But talking about the openness of my structures and the feeling of breath in them. And yeah, I hadn't even really thought of that. And I really appreciate it, because I'm sitting here sort of thinking about that. I don't know. For me, like taking a breath is really important and not something, we always remember. And it's vital to living. And I think I'm drawn to having things have space and have room for breathing, because it's also like, opportunity again, like the breaking, like the cracking, when things are open and when they allow for the space around them and the people around them, then it's not just about them, in and of themselves, but like interacting with the whole environment. Yeah, but thank you for that question.
Can you talk about the titles of your series, of your pieces in this collection and what they mean to you?
Yeah, I can. Um, titling is my least favorite thing about the artistic process, mainly because I do read a lot and I write for myself, not normally for other people. And so I have like collections of words always that I'm writing down as I'm reading things. And so the title of the show, State Changes, is really about that transformative moment. And so all of it is sort of, all of the titles are surrounded by like this idea of transformation and that moment that things transform, or the surrounding things. So the pieces on the wall here are transmutations. So I'm thinking of also about like alchemy, you know, like things changing states. And then other ones are named like Succession, and For a Cha. That's one title, Succession for a Cha. A Cha is the term we used for my great grandmother, who's Malaysian Chinese, and I was really thinking about her a lot while I was making this work. Yeah, I'm gonna cry thinking about it, honestly. But for me, succession is also about like that secondary succession in ecology, and this like inhabitation of a place that wasn't necessarily, that's been through trauma, that's been through something, and then like what growth follows that, you know, in a new alien environment that is our own, right? So that's what that one is really about. And then other ones are like dispersion and, you know, things that have to do with nature, and these sort of like transformations and moments of what that looks like. And then the beaded pieces are titled Labor of Ornament, because there's, that term is used by, in a book called Ornamentalism by, I believe, Anne Chang, but I can't quite remember the name. I just got it and was starting to read it while I was writing my artist statement and making these titles and thinking about ornamentalism as another way of thinking about the Asian female body, right? And being an ornament, but not necessarily something that speaks or has its own like voice. And so how labor intensive it is to just be ornamental instead of something that's like got meat to it. And so like this is my reverse of that, you know. Yeah, so those are like the main titles in the show.
How did you get in touch with this type of art, or how did you learn?
Yeah, how did I get in touch with this type of art, or how did I learn? Um, Honestly, I've been really lucky to have an extremely supportive family, and I've always been like an artist. Like I'm a maker. I need to make things with my hands, or I go crazy. So I've just always sort of like had this like intense draw to making things and making art. And so I was really privileged to get to go to two different art high schools, the Interlochen Arts Academy and the Oxbow School in Napa, which I'll be at right after this. And those were sort of places that I started exploring, what do I want to make, right? Like I always had this compulsive need to make, but like what does that mean to make something, to bring it into the world? And so sort of provide a context to making things with my hands. And yeah, but I grew up around crazy amounts of books. My family always went to museums, and they always made time and space for me to be exposed to art. So it's really been that.
Can you speak about the rich, vibrant colors in your work?
Yeah. So I was asked to speak about the rich, vibrant colors in my work. And color for me is really important in thinking about that taking up space, but also celebrating and being unapologetic about cultural heritage and about, you know, being other in a space. And there's a really deep history between color and the Orient, or the other, you know, and so like, and it being like, you know, too much for a space, and that it needed to be controlled, or it needed to be, you know, in a white space to exist. And so for me, it's like a way to like celebrate that and be like, I'm here. I'm here in all of the color that I want to be. Yeah.
Can you talk
No more
about
questions? What?
what's happening this weekend?
Oh, I've been asked to talk about what's happening this weekend. It's sort of nonstop. So tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. here on the West Coast, I am going to be talking with my friend Perla, who is an artist that went to SMFA with me in Boston and is still over there, and is one of my greatest friends and someone who's been accompanying me on this journey of post art school. What do you do to be an artist? Like, how do you follow this path? And so we're going to talk about that, about being descended from immigrants, being immigrants, you know, like what that culture looks like here as an artist, and why we make art. Because like we're surrounded by people, you know, like a lot of times people ask like, why would you want to be an artist? Like there's no security in that, or stuff like that. There's plenty of reasons that people explain to you that you shouldn't be an artist. So then like we're going to talk about why we are anyways, right? Like, and what that looks like. So it's going to be really informal, and we're just going to be having a conversation. Then we'll open it up to questions at the end, and wherever that wants to go. And then I'm doing a community papermaking day on Sunday. And so there are two sort of rotations for that. There's a 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. and then a 1 to 3 p.m. And those are sliding scale prices. And I'm just really excited to like make some large sheets of paper with people and sort of collaborate on that outside, since that's in person, and talk about like ways people can recycle paper in their homes and like make new things. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm like trying to.
Thank you. I can do a closure.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
We're good. Well, thank you guys. I'm gonna hand it back to Kayla.
Thank you, Anela. Thank you, Anela, so much. You've been so generous and amazing in your residency here. And I just want to thank you for sharing your approach to making, your approach to being an artist and being, you know, a person in our community. I think you've brought so much, and I just want to thank you for sharing. You're part of our community now, and we hope you will come back whenever you can. And if you are in the area and can visit, we have visiting appointments for the rest of the month. The show comes down on the 25th, or actually the 24th. So you can make appointments online, and also all of the work is listed online on our website, sonomacommunitycenter.org. And under events, you'll find the gallery page with Anela's work and also links to her upcoming program this weekend. So hope to see you there, and thanks so much.